So the next thing that I want to do is I want to basically have these users that are in my store, and I want to connect them to this user's component. Ideally, what I would like to be able to do is something like this, which we will be able to do. If I go over to my components, and I've got my users, again, I've got my store set up. Ideally, what I would like to do as a starting point is to say something like users, getting passed in here, and then maybe just as a starter, say users.length. Okay? Of course, that's not getting passed in here. We can run that, but nothing much is happening here. You could sort of imagine something like this. Constant users container. Okay? And this will be a function, and just sort of imagine, just for the sake of argument, that we would end up sending back users, and we'd pass in users, and imagine that this was an empty array that was going here. Okay? In that case, again, let's just be clear, we're going to return our users container, because that's what we want to do. We want to have a container that is aware of our store. So if I did something like that, everyone sees that this is valid. You could pass properties here. Here's an object. Again, properties get passed right in here. Okay? You could end up destructuring them, but you could, if you wanted to, you could, you could call this whatever you want to, and you could call it props.users. But the nice thing about this is you could be very explicit about what you're expecting. You're expecting users. This is a component to display users. Okay? So if we just did that, and we ran that, we could see that we've got no users. To beat a dead horse, we go over here, and we could rerun this. And we see 3. Okay? Again, if our fetch method took a long time, we would end up seeing 0. No, that's not true. We're actually not connecting to our data yet. That's the next thing that we want to do. So how do we end up doing that? Well, in order to connect to our store, one of the things that React Redux comes with is it ends up coming with a method which is called connect. So this is from React Redux, and what we could end up doing here is we're going to import connect from React Redux. And instead of doing this, we're going to go over here and say const users container. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to use our connect function. So our connect function is a higher order function that returns a function. Okay? One of the things that it has is that if we end up passing it a method, map state to props. Okay? This does exactly what you think it's going to end up doing. Now, again, this would end up breaking, but if we end up creating this method, map state to props, you could imagine the way that this ends up working is that here's a function that ends up getting passed a state, and it has to return another object that specifies, hey, look, what properties do you want from the state? And I'm going to specify, hey, look, what I really want, okay, I want you to pass me users as a property. Where am I going to get them from? Well, map state to props. The state gets passed here. My users is my state dot users. Okay? So this basically says, hey, look, you have a big store. What slice of the store would you like? Okay? I'm only interested in users. That's all I want. Send me the users from the state. This gives you back a function. And now you could go over here, and you basically have to call this function with your component. Okay? This gives you a container. You're connecting your container. I mean, again, under the hood, it's not all that magical. What it's doing is it's going to pass to you as a property what you've requested from the state. And you're going to end up getting passed in users. And more critically, when your store changes, okay, you're going to get passed the new collection of users. Okay? So what should end up happening here, if there's no errors, let's see, I could be missing something. Map state to must return a plain object. So let's just see, since I've put in my regular, I think if I just do this, I think if I could do one of two things. I could do a return here. I think that should rebuild. And that'll end up working. Or I think I could probably also just do this. This is, again, if you could avoid the return keyword, why not? And in fact, I could just do this. That should end up working the same way. Again, if I wanted to, I could see that I'm making a call to my server to get the users. Okay. I just want to point out a little other goodness here. Notice that our state has a users property, right? So again, you could use this destructuring right here and specify, I only care about users. You don't even have to put state here. In which case, this becomes really nice because you could specify, hey, look, all I care about is users. And what that does from an ES6 perspective is it says, hey, look, if you were going to do users, users, it does the same thing. It says you have a property called users. Since you didn't give me a key for it, I'm going to assume that that key is users. And your code gets to be a bit cleaner. Okay? And in fact, if you did this, you could probably even put this on one line, but we'll leave that for now. Let's just make sure it's working. Okay? So let's do one other thing here. Let's have the ability, this is a little bit boring, right? We want to actually show users within our application. So let's go over here. And I'm going to end up putting a within here, I'm going to say this is going to be user form. And I'm going to end up, again, if I did this, this is going to break, but I'll say import user form from / user form. Yeah, let's call it user insert. Let's call it user insert form. All right, so I'm going to bring this in here. So one of the things that you're seeing with these components is that these are very dumb components. Okay, they're just pass data and they display the data. They have no state themselves. Okay, so if I was to go over here, I mean, I could get this to work by going over here and adding user insert form.js and going over here and saying import React from React constant user input form equals this function, and just go over here and return a div with the word form in it. That should work okay. Export default user input. Let me change the spelling. I see that that's incorrect. If I go over here rerun that. I'm going to miss something here, and let's just take a look. User insert form, user insert. Okay, so let's go over here. Let's first change this. This I want to call insert. That's not what the problem is, I don't think. Let's be consistent. And let's go over here, and this is going to be users. I've done this before, and it was driving me crazy, right? I only need that if I have named exports. User insert form from user insert form, in which case I should be back in business here. And what I'm going to do here is that I have a little bit of a problem, and the problem is that one of the things that I want to be able to do is I want to be able to insert a user, but the other thing that I want to do is that when I get to this form, I want to be able to have some state, because the state that I'm actually going to have is going to be, the state that I want to have is going to be state that's in my input field, okay? So I'm going to modify this a little bit, and not only am I going to import React, I'm going to end up importing components. And I'm going to modify this, and I'm going to make this a class. User insert form extends component. So this is where I want to have, I don't want to have just a very simple component. I want my component to have some state. And there's a couple of things that I'm going to have to do here. I'm going to put in a constructor. The constructor is going to get past props, and one of the things that you'll end up getting an error with is that I want these props to be available to me. So I'm going to call super with these props. If you don't call super, you'll end up getting an error. But if I call props, those props that are going to get passed in are going to end up being available to me. One of the things that you have to do here is you have to specify a render method. Again, this is a class, an ES6 class. And for my render method, I'm going to return. And for this one, I'm going to end up putting in a div. I'm going to say div class name is equal to form group. And I'm going to want to go over here and I'm put in a label. I'll say name, label. And I'll go over here and I'll say input, class name, form control. And again, this is the value in here is going to change. Okay? Props can't change, but state can. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say value equals this dot state dot name. Now, if I just did that, and I went over here, and let's assume when this loads, I'm going to say this dot state is equal to, and I'm going to give it a name value of an empty string. Okay? I could also, go in here and put in hello if I wanted to. But if I end up doing this, going back over here and reloading this. So one of the things that it's telling me, it's giving me an error message. And notice I can't change this value, okay? Because you have to explicitly set your state values. I know this is a little bit different than, you don't really have any two-way data binding. You have to be very explicit. So what I'm going to do here, and it's actually telling me you need to have an on change in order to handle this. So one of the things that I could do is I could go over here and say on change. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify handle name change. Okay? So on change, I'm going to specify actually this handle name change, handle name change. And if I go over here and I just put in E, because what happens is that this change will get passed. This is actually a DOM event. And if I say console.log e.target, which is the DOM element, value, I should be able to see it here. Okay? Nothing will really change. But if I do that, notice when I click on a key, I'll see it, but it won't be reflected up here. Okay? I want to show you one other issue. After this, I want to set the state. But if I say console.log this, notice it telling me that this is undefined. Okay? And this is where you do a very simple binding to specify on change, call handle change, but do me a favor, bind it to this. And this way I'll have access to my state, which I can then update. And that's going to allow me to do something very simplistic. This set state, what do I want to set? The name is going to be eTarget.value. And now, when I do that, I should be able to go in here and modify this. And the only other thing that I'm going to do here, let's make this an empty string. And let's go over here and we'll just put a div here with a class name of form group. And I'm going to put a button here, class name of btn primary. And I'm going to say save. If I go over here, I should see that button show up. And I could also do something like disabled. And I could specify you're going to be disabled if this.state.name.length is equal to 0. Right? So I want it to be disabled. Now, if I go over here, it ends up getting enabled because the state ends up changing. And what I want to do here is that when this ends up getting saved, I'm going to go over here, on click, and I'll say this dot save. That's what I want to call. So I'll have a method called save. And again, if I do a console.log this, and I click on save, I'll see that this is undefined. So again, I want to do my binding and say, hey, look, call save, but do me a favor. Bind it to this object. Okay, so now we come up against our next part of what we really want to do here. And so now we were able to map our state to our properties, but now let's go back to our actions and figure out what we have to do to end up adding a user. So I'm going to go back to my actions here. So here's my users reducer. Now I've got this fetch users, okay? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy it. And this is going to be create user. What do I want to pass in when I go to create a user? User, of course, right? What do I want to do with that user? Well, Axios has the ability to post. You don't have to worry about the content type, JSON. It does it automatically. I'm going to pass in my user. My user just has to have a name property, or at least that's what I want to have. And if I get my response, I don't want to call init user. I want to end up calling create user. All right? So now the question comes up, how do I end up passing that? How do I end up passing that to my container component? Okay? Because what I really want to be able to do here is something like this in my components in my users component, ideally my users insert form, instead of calling save here, I would really like to do something like this dot props dot create user and pass it in a user who has a name of this dot state dot name. Right? That would be the new user that ended up getting created. Of course, if I went to run this now, this is going to end up blowing up because this props create user doesn't exist. So this is now the second part. We can map our state to props, but we could also specify what we want to be able to dispatch to props. Okay? So there's a second parameter here. What I'm going to do here is go back to my users container, because this is all going through my users container. And I'm also going to have constant map dispatch to props. And what I'm going to specify here is that create user, again, if I want to do this without the return, let me do that. So I'm going to return from this create user, create user. Now where does create user end up coming from? Is I'm going to import it, create user. Where's it coming from? / Redux users reducer. Right? That's where that create user is coming from. And so now, if I go over here, I could go in here and I could say map dispatch to props. Let's just take a look and see if that doesn't give us any errors. Again, what it's saying here is that it's going to put right on, if you end up giving it an action, okay, which this is a function, okay, it'll basically say, I will call this function, okay, since you're mapping it to the dispatcher, it'll call this function and pass it to the dispatcher. You don't have to end up doing it explicitly. Okay? It'll automatically do it. Again, we're mapping, right, what we want to dispatch to our properties to make it easy to access. What actions are we interested in? Okay? So now we can isolate our store, not only the parts of the store we want, but which actions we want to send to our store. So if I do this, just make sure this didn't break anything. Cannot find users reducer, and I think maybe I need to go up one level. Let's try it now. Okay, and what I need to do is you need to just pass this down the chain. So if I go over to my users page, not only should I be getting users, but I should also be getting, again, these things are properties, create user is being passed in as well. The same way user is, create user as well. We're pulling this in from our action, and what we want to do is we want to pass it here equals create user. Okay? So now this is getting passed in here. This we could actually see a little bit. If we ended up going, because we have a real component that has state, if I were to go over here and say console.log props, I would see that my props has a create user method, which is a key that I could end up calling. Okay? So this now should give me the ability to call props create user. And if I go over here and this is written correctly, I should be able to say mo. Try to find out what's happening there. So this props create user. Let's see if this is getting called. Let's actually just see if it's getting called. So let's take a look. So we're exporting create user. I don't think it's hitting this. I'm not sure why. Let me take a look at one thing. So we've got our reducer. Map dispatch to props. Let me do one. I don't think this is the issue, but I'm going to do one thing. I don't think this is really, this might matter, it might not, I don't know. So I might have this incorrect. It's possible that map dispatch to props is just an object. I mean, it looked like it was getting called, but let's just see. So if we go over here and we say create user, it's coming in here. Right, this ends up getting fed into here. We grab it here, it gets passed in. Here's our form. This dot props create user. Let's try it. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the difference was between those two things, but I guess the dispatch, it's not like you basically have to just give it an object. So there's no function call like you have with map state to props. I guess that's what it comes down to. So one of the things here that we want to do, first of all, it'd be good if we ended up showing the users. That's a pretty simple thing to do. The other thing is that after this ends up getting set, we probably want to do this dot set state name to something empty. And probably the last thing we'll do, let's make sure that works. So we say mo, and mo ends up getting created here. And let's just go back to our users. And here, let's do a ul class name list group. And here we'll go over here and we'll specify users.map. We'll have a user. And just for the sake of argument, we'll give this a class name of list group item. And here we'll just show the user's name. And that should be the end of the map. Right, so we're mapping that. Now we should have a bunch of list items. The only error that you're going to get here is that you have a key issue. So what you want to do here, and this probably should really fall in the category of something like, probably would be better off if this was, you know, take the user item, user equals user. And it's still going to want a key key equals, and this is just going to have to be something unique, user ID. And here we'll just say that we're going to have this user item. And again, we'll keep this pretty simple. And we'll go over here and we'll say user item.js. And we'll say import React from React, constant user item. And again, this is going to be passed a user, which you can just pull out. And we'll keep this simple, and this will be an li class name, list group item, user name. And if we go over here, we could say export default user item. So if that builds, we should see that error go away with the unique key. And we could say mo. Can I read ID of undefined? Let's just take a quick look. So we're passing in the user here. And I would assume that this is going to be happening here. Maybe. Let's take a look. Might be able to look in here. Yeah, so it doesn't like key of user ID. Do I not have IDs? Let's look. I would think I would. Let's look at our API users. Well, they all seem to have IDs, right? I'm going to take out this.
There after the refresh. Hello doesn't show up if you refresh, it'll show up.
Yeah. But it did seem to look like it was working before, which leads me to believe users map. We have a user. I'm going to take this out. I don't think that this is it, but let me just see. User item. So now it's giving me the message about the keys. It's a little bit strange. If we ended up going back to this, I could have sworn this was working. I think. Maybe not. Why would that be? I don't think it's the list of users. I think it has to do with, let's see something. So this error is happening. Let's just isolate it a little bit. So this is happening. Let's say we just did this. Let's keep it simple. All right. Just doing this, and we're going to run it again. I think what's happening is there's an issue. Let's put this key back in. Let's actually go, and this should work. So let's do user item. I think I know what the issue is. And this is going to be user, and let's give this a key. So we know that it works when we go over here, when we load it for the first time, right? Doesn't seem to be an issue, right? But when we do this, we get the error, okay? And we weren't getting the error here. Right, I could actually just comment this out. I thought. I guess not. There. So it's not, I don't think it was happening here, right? So I'll put this back in. So what that leads me to believe is that there is some issue in our reducer for the users. I'm not passing in the user, so there's no ID and there's no key. I don't want to put in users here. I want to put in user, right? And that should make this go away. 1, 2. So you could imagine going from here and actually adding ways to delete and ways of editing, just sort of variations on the theme. But again, you're seeing how Redux ends up working, where basically you're deciding what slice of the state that you want to pass to these containers, and you're deciding what actions you want to pass to the containers. And again, the thing that becomes pretty clear with this is that, as you look at this module, or maybe something simpler like the user insert form, it's very much self-contained, right? You look at this, you can see all the things that this ends up doing, right? Everything is sort of being passed in here, right? You have to pass these methods in here, but it's pretty clear, how this ends up working, right? I mean, it's even more clear if you end up looking at, something like this, where it becomes really obvious that this is just a really dumb component that has no state, that's just displaying data. And for that matter, even here, again, if you just looked at this in isolation, you could see that things are getting passed in here, but they end up getting passed in here from Redux. All right? I think that's going to do it for the introduction.